The key felt heavier than it should have, the metal warm against Claire Rowe's palm despite the October chill. She stood before the colonial house, its white paint peeling like diseased skin, black shutters hanging at broken angles. The brass nameplate beside the door had been scraped clean, but she could still make out the ghost of letters, Dr. Robert Valentino, M.D. Claire's hands trembled as she inserted the key, the one marked return in her adoptive mother's belongings. The lock turned with surprising ease, as if it had been waiting. The door swung open to reveal a hallway that stretched impossibly far, lined with doors that seemed to multiply in her peripheral vision. The air tasted of antiseptic and something else, something organic and wrong. Her tape recorder's red light blinked steadily as she pressed record. October 15th, 10:47 p.m. This is Claire Rowe entering the former clinic at 1247 Hollow Creek Road. Her voice echoed strangely, as if the walls were lined with something that shouldn't be there. I'm here to find answers about my birth mother, Rebecca Marsh, who disappeared during a procedure in 1991. The intake desk sat in the center of the foyer, its surface cleared, except for a clipboard holding a single sheet of yellowed paper. The rules, written in faded blue ink. 1. Patients must not leave before the procedure is complete. 2. Never refer to room 5C by name. 3. The doctor only appears after dark and only in the morgue hallway. 4. Do not read the charts aloud. They remember. 5. If a child cries from inside the procedure room, cover your ears and don't respond. Claire's breath caught. She was a trauma nurse. She'd seen enough medical facilities to know these weren't standard protocols. The paper felt warm under her fingers, as if recently written. A sound echoed from somewhere deep in the house, the wheeze and hiss of old ventilation or perhaps breathing. Claire clicked on her flashlight and moved toward the hallway. Her footsteps seemed to echo from ahead of her, as if someone was walking the same path just out of sight. The first door she tried was locked. The second opened onto a supply closet filled with instruments that gleamed despite decades of abandonment. Forceps, curettes, speculums, all arranged with surgical precision on stainless steel trays. In the corner, a mobile Ivor stand held a bag of saline that swayed gently, though no breeze stirred the air. Claire's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number, room 3A. Your chart is ready. Her chart? She hadn't made an appointment, hadn't even told anyone she was coming here. Room 3A sat halfway down the main corridor, its door slightly ajar. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed to life as she entered, revealing an examination room that looked freshly prepared. The paper on the table was crisp and white. On the counter, a manila folder bore her name in the same blue ink as the rules. With shaking fingers, she opened the file. The first page was a birth certificate, not the amended one she'd grown up with, but an original. Mother, Rebecca Marsh. Father, unknown. Date of birth, March 3, 1991. Place of birth, Hollow Creek Clinic. But it was the second page that made her stomach lurch. A patient intake form, filled out in her own handwriting, though she'd never been here before. Patient, Claire Rowe, age 32, reason for visit, completion of interrupted procedure, next of kin to notify. None. Special considerations, patient shows signs of inherited condition, recommend immediate intervention. The date on the form was today's date. The signature at the bottom was hers. Claire stumbled backward, knocking over a metal tray. Instruments clattered to the floor with sounds like breaking bones. The lights flickered, and in the strobe effect, she saw something move in. Her peripheral vision, a figure in white scrubs standing in the doorway. When the light steadied, no one was there. Her tape recorder had stopped working. The red light was dark, the device cold as ice despite the warmth of the room. She pressed play anyway and heard her own voice, tinny and distant. The procedure was necessary. The patient consented. There's always room for one more. She had never said those words. Claire ran from room 3A, her footsteps echoing in patterns that seemed to lead her in circles. The hallway stretched and contracted like a living thing, doors appearing and disappearing as she passed. Every time she looked back, the path behind her had changed. She found herself in what must have been the records room, though she couldn't remember choosing to go there. Filing cabinets lined the walls, their drawers pulled open at random. Intervals, manila folders spilling onto the floor like wounded birds. The air here was thick with the smell of old paper and something medicinal that burned her nostrils. A folder caught her eye, not because it was different, but because it was exactly the same as the one she'd found with her name on it. Inside was another birth certificate for Claire Rowe, but this one showed a different date, March 3rd, 1989. Same mother, same unknown father, same place of birth. She grabbed another folder, another birth certificate for Claire Rowe, dated March 3rd, 1987, then 1985, 1983. Each file contained the same patient intake form, filled out in handwriting that grew progressively more erratic, more desperate. In the oldest files, the signatures weren't even attempts at letters, just frantic scratches across the page. Impossible, she whispered, but the word felt hollow in the stale air. A drawer slammed shut behind her. She spun around to find all the filing cabinets sealed tight, their silver handles gleaming like surgical instruments. On the wall, where moments before there had been nothing, hung a framed photograph of Dr. Robert Valentino. He was younger in the picture than she'd expected, maybe 40, with kind eyes and a gentle smile. Below the photo, a brass nameplate read, "In memory of those we couldn't save." But as she stared, the image seemed to shift. The smile became strained, the eyes grew hollow. By the time she looked away, the man in the photograph looked haunted. Her reflection in the glass was wrong, not different, wrong. The Claire in the reflection wore hospital scrubs instead of her jeans and jacket. Her hair was pulled back in a surgical cap, and her eyes held a knowledge that the real Claire didn't possess. The reflection's mouth moved, forming words Claire couldn't hear through the glass. She stumbled backward, knocking into a desk she was certain hadn't been there before. On its surface lay an open appointment book, its pages filled with entries in that familiar blue ink. Every slot for every day was the same entry: Claire Rowe, 3 p.m., completion of interrupted procedure. The dates went back 32 years and forward indefinitely. "This isn't real," she said aloud, but her voice sounded uncertain even to her own ears. "I'm having another breakdown. That's all this is." A child's laughter echoed from somewhere deeper in the building, high and bright and completely wrong in this place of shadows and antiseptic air. It was followed by the sound of footsteps, small feet running down corridors that shouldn't exist. Claire's hands found her phone, but the screen showed no signal, no time, no battery indicator. Just static, rolling in waves across the display like an ultrasound image. In the static, she thought she saw shapes, a small form curled in on itself, a larger figure leaning over it, instruments gleaming in fluorescent light. The laughter came again, closer now. It was the sound a child might make during a game of hide-and-seek, delighted at not being found. But there was something else underneath it, a note of hysteria, of fear, being transformed into something that only pretended to be joy. Claire followed the sound down a corridor lined with examination rooms. Each door bore a number: 1A, 1 billion, 1C, then 2A, 2 billions, 2C. The laughter seemed to come from behind each door in turn, leading her deeper into the clinic's maze-like interior. At the end of the hallway, she found a staircase leading to what must be the second floor. A sign at the bottom read, "Authorized personnel only, procedure rooms 5A to 5C. The 5C had been crossed out so many times it was barely legible, the ink forming a black wound in the white sign. The laughter stopped. In the sudden silence, Claire became aware of other sounds: the hiss of oxygen lines, the beep of monitors, the whisper of sheets being turned down on examination tables. The building was alive around her, preparing for procedures that should have ended decades ago. Her tape recorder sparked to life in her pocket, the red light blazing suddenly bright. When she pulled it out, it was warm enough to burn her fingers, but she held on anyway. The display showed a recording in progress, though she hadn't pressed any buttons. "Patient shows remarkable resistance to standard procedures," her own voice said through the tiny speaker. "Dr. Valentino recommends alternate approach. The patient must understand she was born for this purpose. There's always been room for one more." Claire pressed stop, but her voice continued. "Room 5C is prepared. The doctor is waiting. The procedure will be completed this time." She hurled the tape recorder down the hallway. It shattered against the wall, pieces of plastic and metal scattering across the floor. But her voice continued to echo from the fragments. "This time, this time, this time." The second floor revealed itself reluctantly, as if the building was unsure whether Claire belonged there. The staircase groaned under her weight, each step echoing with the sound of old wood and older secrets. At the top, a single hallway stretched in both directions, lined with doors marked with faded plaques: recovery, consultation, staff only. She chose the door marked staff only because it was the only one that stood slightly open. Inside, she found what must have been Dr. Valentino's office. Unlike the rest of the building, this room felt lived in, as if someone had just stepped out for a moment. Papers covered the desk in organized chaos, Medical journals lay open to articles about experimental procedures, and a coffee cup still held the faint aroma of what it had once contained. But it was the diary that drew her attention, a leather-bound journal sitting open on a side table, its pages covered in a woman's careful handwriting. The entry at the top was dated just 3 weeks ago. I keep coming back here, though I swore I wouldn't. Dad's been dead for 15 years, but his work continues. The building remembers everything he did, every choice he made, every patient he couldn't save. Today I found another file with Claire's name on it. That makes 37 now, each one slightly different, each one documenting a procedure that never quite finished. I understand now what he was trying to do. The interrupted procedures, they echo through time, trying to complete themselves. She keeps being born, over and over, because something was left undone. I've tried to burn the files, tried to tear down the building, tried to forget, but the echoes are getting stronger. She's coming back, just like he said she would, and this time, I don't think I can stop what happens next. The entry was signed with a shaky initial. M. Claire flipped back through the pages, finding entry after entry in the same handwriting. Martha Valentino, the doctor's daughter, had been documenting the clinic's impossible persistence for years. The entries grew more frantic as they went back in time. The procedure rooms reset themselves every night. I find them clean, prepared, waiting. The instruments arrange themselves on the trays. The lights come on by themselves. It's as if the building is preparing for a surgery that never ends. I met her today, Rebecca Marsh. She was standing in the parking lot, looking exactly as she did the day she disappeared in 1991. She asked me if her daughter was safe. I couldn't tell her that her daughter keeps being reborn, keeps returning, keeps trying to finish what was started. Dad's notes say the procedure was necessary to save both mother and child. But something went wrong. The timeline split. Every possible outcome began playing out simultaneously. In some realities, they both died. In others, only one survived. In a few, both lived. The building holds all these possibilities, and Claire is the nexus where they meet. The final entry made Claire's blood run cold. She's here tonight. I can hear her in the hallways, looking for room 5C. I've hidden. The door changed the numbering, but the room finds her anyway. It always finds her. She thinks she's looking for answers about her birth, but that's not why she's really here. She's here to choose which reality gets to be real, and I'm afraid of what she'll choose. A sound from the hallway made Claire look up from the diary. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming closer. But these weren't the light steps of a child. These were the measured paces of someone who belonged here, who had every right to walk these halls. Claire closed the diary and moved to the office door. Through the crack, she could see a figure in a white coat moving down the hallway with the easy confidence of someone making rounds. Dr. Valentino, looking exactly as he had in the photograph, unchanged by the decades since his death. He paused at each door, checking charts that materialized in his hands, making notes with a pen that wrote in that familiar blue ink. When he reached the office door, he stopped and turned toward her hiding place. "I know you're there, Claire," he said softly. His voice was kind, grandfatherly, the voice of a doctor who genuinely cared about his patients. "We've been waiting such a long time for you to come home." She pressed herself against the door, hardly daring to breathe. "Your mother was very brave," he continued. "She knew the risks. She understood that some procedures require sacrifices across multiple timelines. She chose to let you live in as many realities as possible, even if it meant she couldn't exist in any of them." The door handle began to turn, though Claire was certain she hadn't touched it. But the procedure was never completed. That's why you keep coming back, why you can never quite fit into any single timeline. You're looking for the one reality where you were meant to be. The door swung open to reveal Dr. Valentino standing in the hallway, his white coat pristine, his smile gentle and terrible. In his hands he held a clipboard with a single sheet of paper, a consent form with her name already filled in. "Room 5C is ready," he said. "It's been ready for 32 years. Shall we finish what we started?" Claire ran, but the hallways betrayed her. Every corridor she chose led back to the same waiting room, a space she was certain hadn't existed moments before. Vinyl chairs in faded blue arranged around a coffee table covered with magazines from 1991. A water cooler hummed in the corner, its bottle full and clear. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in the sickly pallor of institutional lighting. On the wall, a clock showed 3 p.m., its hands frozen in place. Dr. Valentino was nowhere to be seen, but his presence lingered like the scent of surgical soap. The consent form he'd held was now clipped to a board on the reception desk, the signature line waiting for her decision. "You don't have to sign it." Claire spun around to find a woman sitting in one of the chairs, a woman who looked exactly like her, but wore the scrubs and weary expression of someone who'd been waiting in this room for decades. Her name tag read, Rebecca Marsh, patient. Mom? Claire's voice cracked on the word. In some timelines, Rebecca replied. In others, I'm you. In a few, we're both someone else entirely. Time works differently here. The building holds all the possibilities that were created when the procedure went wrong. Claire sank into the chair across from her. I don't understand any of this. Dr. Valentino was trying to help, Rebecca explained, her voice carrying the exhaustion of countless repeated conversations. He had developed a technique, experimental, dangerous, but potentially revolutionary. It was supposed to ensure that no matter what complications arose during difficult procedures, both mother and child would survive in at least one timeline. But something went wrong. Everything went wrong. Rebecca's laugh held no humor. The procedure created a cascade of branching realities. Every choice, every possible outcome, began playing out simultaneously. The building exists in all of them, trying to bring the procedure to a successful conclusion in at least one timeline. A sound echoed from behind a door marked procedure room, the cry of a baby, followed immediately by the wail of a child, then the sob of a grown woman. All the same voice at different ages, existing all at once. That's you, Rebecca said gently. All the versions of you that were born and died and lived and never existed. They're all waiting behind that door. Claire's hands shook. What am I supposed to do? Choose, Rebecca replied. Go into that room and choose which reality gets to continue. The others will fade away, but one will become real. Dr. Valentino will finally be able to complete his procedure. The building will be able to rest. What happens to you? Rebecca's smile was infinitely sad. That depends on which reality you choose. In some, I die on the operating table. In others, I live but you don't. In a few precious possibilities, we both survive, but we never find each other. And in one, just one, we both live, and I get to watch my daughter grow up. The crying behind the door intensified, becoming a cacophony of overlapping voices. Claire could hear herself as a newborn, as a toddler, as a teenager, as an adult. All of them afraid, all of them calling for help, all of them trapped in a moment that never quite finished. But if I choose the reality where we both live, Claire said, what about all the others? What about the versions of me that don't make it? They'll cease to exist. They'll become possibilities that were never realized, dreams that were never dreamed. Claire stood and walked to the procedure room door. Through the frosted glass, she could see shapes moving, herself at every age, all trapped in the same endless moment of birth and death and birth again. There's another choice, Rebecca said quietly. You could refuse to choose. Let all the timelines continue to exist simultaneously. The building would never rest, but every version of us would get to live. Forever trapped here? Forever free to exist in all possibilities. Claire's hand rested on the door handle. Behind the glass, the shapes pressed closer, dozens of versions of herself reaching toward the handle from the other side. In their faces, she saw every life she could have lived, the successful trauma nurse, the broken woman seeking answers, the child who never made it past birth, the adult who found peace, the daughter who knew her mother's love. The clock on the wall ticked once, its hands moving for the first time in decades. 3:01 p.m. Time was running out, and Claire had to choose one reality where some version of her story could finally end, or infinite realities where all versions could continue forever. The door handle was warm under her palm, waiting for her decision. The door to room 5C appeared without fanfare, materializing between two examination rooms as if it had always been there. Unlike the other doors, this one was unlocked, and it opened at Claire's touch with the whisper of well-oiled hinges. Inside, the operating theater was pristine. Surgical lights hung at precise angles, their bulbs gleaming though no power ran through the building. The operating table in the center was draped with crisp white sheets, and beside it stood a cart of instruments arranged with meticulous care. Everything was ready, waiting, as if the procedure had been scheduled for that very moment. But it was the warmth that struck her most. The table radiated heat like a living thing, and when Claire approached, she could feel it through the soles of her shoes. Someone had been lying there recently, or was lying there still, in another timeline, in another possibility. Dr. Valentino stood beside a bank of monitors, though their screens showed only static. He looked older now, more tired, as if the decades of waiting had finally caught up with him. Room 5C, he said without turning around. The name we couldn't say, the place we couldn't acknowledge. This is where it all began, and where it has to end. What really happened here? Claire asked. He gestured to the table. Your mother came to me with complications. The pregnancy was high risk, multiple factors that could have killed you both. I had developed a new technique, quantum surgical intervention, I called it. The idea was to perform the procedure across multiple quantum states simultaneously, ensuring that no matter what went wrong, at least one timeline would result in success. Claire moved closer to the table. In the white sheets, she could see the impression of a body, as if someone invisible was lying there. But the quantum field destabilized, Dr. Valentino continued. Instead of creating a clean bifurcation, one timeline where the procedure succeeded, one where it failed, it created an infinite cascade. Every possible outcome began occurring simultaneously. Your mother died and lived and was never pregnant and gave birth successfully, all at the same time. And me? You were born and died and never existed and grew up healthy, all in the same instant. The building became a nexus point, holding all these realities together. Every time you return here, you're trying to collapse the quantum field back to a single state. Claire reached out to touch the table's surface. It was warm, almost feverish, and she could swear she felt a pulse beneath the padding. The other versions of me, she said, they're not just possibilities. They're real as you are. More real in some ways because they've been here longer. Dr. Valentino finally turned to face her, and she saw that his eyes held the same exhaustion as her mother's. They've been waiting for you to make the choice that will determine which reality gets to continue. The monitors around the room flickered to life, showing vital signs, dozens of them all. Slightly different, all displaying the life signs of different versions of Claire. Heart rates from newborn rapid to adult steady, brainwave patterns from the chaos of birth to the complexity of adult thought. All of them were alive, all of them were real, and all of them were waiting. Show me, Claire said. Dr. Valentino nodded and adjusted something on the central monitor. The static cleared, and Claire saw herself lying on the table, but not herself as she was now. This Claire was younger, newer, caught in the moment of being born. Around her, other versions of herself flickered in and out of existence. The child who lived to be 5 before succumbing to the complications, the teenager who never knew she was adopted, the adult who became a doctor herself, the woman who died in childbirth giving birth to her own daughter. They're all you, Dr. Valentino said. Every choice your life could have taken, every path that was closed off, every door that opened instead. The quantum field holds them all. Claire watched the versions of herself living and dying and being born in endless cycles. In some timelines, Rebecca lived too, and she could see the two of them together. Mother and daughter finally meeting, sharing meals, laughing together. In others, Rebecca died but left letters, explanations, love preserved in writing. In still others, both of them died, but peacefully, together. What happens if I don't choose? She asked. The field continues to cascade. Eventually, it will destabilize completely. Not just this building, not just your family line, but reality itself in this region. The quantum fractures will spread until entire counties exist in overlapping timelines. Claire stared at the monitors, at all the lives she could have lived. And if I do choose, one reality becomes real, one timeline continues, the others dissolve. Meaning billions of versions of me die, meaning billions of versions of you were never real to begin with. They return to being possibilities instead of actualities. The table's warmth intensified, and Claire realized that one of the versions of herself was becoming more solid, more present. This Claire was older, grayer, and she looked directly at the Claire who stood beside the table. Choose us, this other Claire said, her voice echoing strangely in the room. Choose the timeline where we both live long lives, where we find peace. Another version appeared, translucent but visible, a Claire who had died young but peacefully, who had never suffered the adoptive mother's death, the nervous breakdown, the desperate search for answers. Choose me, she whispered. Choose the timeline where the questions never needed to be asked. More versions materialized around the table, dozens of Claires representing every possible life, every outcome of the interrupted procedure. Each one begged to be the reality that was allowed to continue. I can't, Claire said, backing toward the door. I can't choose which versions of myself get to live. Then you choose all of them, Dr. Valentino said quietly. And reality fractures completely. The building shuddered around them, and Claire could hear the sound of walls cracking, of time itself straining under the weight of infinite possibilities. The choice was no longer whether to choose, it was what to choose and how quickly. She could make the decision before the quantum field tore everything apart. All the versions of herself were looking at her now, waiting for her to decide which one of them was real enough to survive. The building was coming apart. Claire could feel it in the vibrations under her feet, see it in the way the walls flickered between different states of decay. In some timelines, the clinic was brand new, its paint fresh and its equipment gleaming. In others, it had been demolished decades ago, leaving only empty foundations. All of these realities were trying to exist simultaneously, and the strain was tearing holes in the fabric of space itself. The versions of herself gathered around the operating table were becoming more solid, more desperate. They pressed close, their hands reaching out to touch her, to make contact with the version of themselves who had the power to choose. "Please," said a Claire who looked exactly as she did now, but whose eyes held the contentment of someone who had found all the answers she'd been seeking. "Choose the timeline where we understand, where we find peace with what happened." "No," whispered a Claire who was barely more than a child, who had died young but without the trauma of abandonment. "Choose the timeline where we never had to suffer, where the questions never haunted us." A Claire who had become a successful surgeon stepped forward. "Choose the timeline where we use our knowledge to help others, where mother's death saves thousands of lives." Each version of herself represented not just a different outcome, but a different philosophy of what life should be: safe or meaningful, peaceful or productive, short but sweet or long but difficult. Claire realized she wasn't just choosing which version of herself would live, she was choosing what kind of life was worth living. Dr. Valentino moved to the head of the operating table, his hands steady despite the chaos around them. "The field is destabilizing rapidly," he said. "You have minutes at most before the cascade becomes irreversible." Claire looked at the monitors showing her infinite vital signs, all the hearts that beat with different rhythms, all the minds that thought different thoughts, all the lives that had been lived in parallel. And suddenly she understood what she had to do. "There's another option," she said quietly. The other versions of herself fell silent, listening. "What if the choice isn't which reality gets to be real?" Claire continued. "What if the choice is whether reality needs to be singular at all?" Dr. Valentino frowned. "The quantum field can't maintain infinite states indefinitely. It will collapse, only if it's trying to exist in a single space-time," Claire interrupted. "But what if it doesn't have to? What if this building becomes a place outside normal reality, where all possibilities can coexist?" She moved to the operating table and placed her hands on its warm surface. Immediately, she felt the connection to all her other selves, not as separate entities, but as facets of a single complex existence. "The building has been trying to finish the procedure for 32 years, she said. But maybe the procedure was already finished. Maybe the point was never to choose one timeline. Maybe it was to create a space where choice itself becomes unnecessary." The other Claires looked at each other, hope and fear warring in their expressions. "You're proposing to make this permanent," Dr. Valentino said slowly. "To turn this building into a quantum nexus where all possibilities exist simultaneously." "Not just this building," Claire said. "Me. I become the nexus. I become the place where all the timelines meet and coexist." She could feel the truth of it resonating through the quantum field. The building had never been trying to collapse the possibilities into a single reality. It had been trying to find a consciousness capable of holding all the possibilities at once. "But what does that mean for you?" asked the version of herself who had lived a normal life. "What kind of existence would that be?" Claire smiled and felt all her other selves smile with her. "It means I get to live all the lives, experience all the possibilities. I become every version of myself that ever could have been. And the cost? I can never leave this place. I become part of the building, part of the quantum field itself. But in return, every possible version of our story gets to be real." The building shuddered again, more violently this time. Cracks appeared in the walls, showing glimpses of the realities beyond, timelines where the clinic had never existed, where Claire had never been born, where the universe itself had taken different paths. "Decide quickly," Dr. Valentino urged. Claire looked around at all the versions of herself, the successful ones and the broken ones, the ones who had died young and the ones who had lived long lives, the ones who had found love and the ones who had found solitude. Each one was precious, each one was real, each one deserved to continue existing. "I consent," she said, and the words echoed from every version of herself around the table. The quantum field stabilized instantly. The cracks in the walls sealed themselves, but not by returning to a single reality. Instead, they became windows through which all realities could be glimpsed simultaneously. The building stopped shuddering and began to hum with the sound of infinite possibilities existing in harmony. Claire felt herself expanding, becoming larger than her single body could contain. She was the newborn Claire taking her first breath, and the dying Claire taking her last. She was the Claire who had found her mother and the Claire who never stopped searching. She was every choice she had ever made and every choice she had never been given the chance to make. Doctor, Valentino smiled, and for the first time since she'd encountered him, his expression held genuine peace. The procedure is complete, he said. All patients are stable. All timelines are preserved. He began to fade, his purpose finally fulfilled, but his voice lingered. Welcome home, Claire, all of you. The building settled into its new existence as a space between realities, where every possibility was real and every story was allowed to continue. In some timelines, visitors would come seeking answers about the abandoned clinic. In others, the building would remain empty, a mystery that was never solved. But in all timelines, Claire would be there, not as a prisoner of the quantum field, but as its guardian, ensuring that every version of every story that had ever begun within those walls would get its chance to reach a conclusion. She had found her mother in every reality where such a thing was possible. She had found peace in every reality where such a thing could exist. She had found herself in every reality where such a thing mattered. And in the space between all possibilities, Claire Rowe finally understood that sometimes the most profound choice is not to choose at all, but to embrace the infinite complexity of what it means to be human. The building stood on Hollow Creek Road, unchanged on the outside but fundamentally transformed within. To most passers-by, it appeared to be nothing more than an abandoned clinic, slowly succumbing to time and weather. But for those who knew how to look, who understood that reality was far more flexible than most people believed, it was something else entirely, a place where every story that had ever begun could continue indefinitely, where every question could eventually find its answer, and where every broken thing could discover what it meant to be whole. There was always room for one more possibility, and Claire Rowe, in all her infinite variations, was finally home.